A little while ago, I made a video called The Wasted Potential of the Joy-Cons and How to Fix It. And most people seem to like the video, which is great. Thanks for liking and subscribing and all that stuff. But a lot of the comments were something to the tune of, I don't even care about any colored Joy-Cons, just get rid of the drift. Or, the Wii U didn't drift, how is this still an issue? Or the meme-ified cars, drift, Joy-Cons, I can do it too. So while the drift was addressed at the beginning of that video for just a second, we didn't really touch on it all that much. So that's what we're gonna do in this video. So the question is, why hasn't Nintendo fixed the Joy-Con drift yet? Let's talk about it. As we get into the video, this is the kind of topic where people have a tendency to rush down to the comments, leave a reply just to the title, feeling very justified, like they did a huge service to the world, having not really heard the points on either side of the argument. And in all fairness, if you really want to do that, go for it. But if you really want to touch some buttons while you're down there this early on in the video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. That would be great. We make content like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And for beneficial polling reasons, you can go ahead and comment now if you've had Joy-Con drift issues at all, because I'd be very curious to see kind of the ratio on that. But for this topic, it is kind of complicated. So we're going to try to take as unbiased an opinion as possible and dissect the whole thing. I have seen a lot of these individual bits be talked about in different conversations, but never just one conversation that's put them all together for one contextual narrative. So that said, let's figure it out. What's going on? Let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. You may be new to the Nintendo Switch conversation, and if so, you could have easily missed out on a similar but actually different controversy around the beginning of the life cycle of the Switch. At launch back around March 2017, there were lots of reports of left Joy-Con issues. The symptoms of this issue were that as you would be running with Link in Breath of the Wild, for example, suddenly he wouldn't turn when you told him to, and he'd keep running off into the sunset or right into a Lionel. And this was primarily happening with the left Joy-Con. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this a little bit later, but for now, let's take a pin out of our little flowery shaped pin box. You hold on to it for me, and we're gonna come back to that later for reasons that'll all make sense in time. Now, back toward the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, we saw reports of users starting to experience Joy-Con drift. This was several months after some other hardware complaints had surfaced, such as bent screens on the Switch, cracks around the back top corner, and splitting around the vent. All of these were issues whose conversations had mostly culminated around the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, and had just about dropped off. Until on July 16th, 2019, when Kotaku once again reported on Joy-Con drift, and somehow it just exploded. Everyone caught wind of the conversation, and people who hadn't noticed it before now started to, and those who had noticed now had a place to speak up. All in all, this was somehow the unifying moment that everyone band together to talk about the fact that Joy-Con drift was, and perhaps had been, affecting them for a while now. And this was right around the time that the Switch Lite was announced. In fact, this was just 4 days prior, which meant that these pieces of news were practically simultaneous to the somewhat attentive consumer. Okay, and once again, we're gonna come back to this one in just a minute. So we've got the Switch left Joy-Con issues in one hand and the Joy-Con drift from 2019 in the other. So now that the Switch Lite was announced and subsequently the Switch version 2 with an improved chipset and therefore battery life, the question was posed, will these pieces of hardware fix the Joy-Con drift? And in many ways that's a reasonable question to ask, so we fast forward a month for the Switch version 2 and another for the Switch Lite. Once released, tech channels like SpawnWave and some others take the controllers apart to find the conclusive answer, no. For all intents and purposes, these are the same joysticks as the Joy-Con had before, both in the V2 and in the Lite. And not only that, but within the first couple of weeks of release of the Switch Lite, there were actually videos of people proving that they had drift on their newly released Switch Lites, and that was surely both frustrating to them and worrisome to the rest of us. So to sum up where we are at this point, this is a third instance of some kind of joystick issue to happen on the Nintendo Switch. At launch, once again another 2 years in or so, and then with the Switch Lite, of course. But although some of the conversation would suggest that these are the same root cause, that's not exactly the case. So let's circle back around to those issues that we hadn't resolved just yet. When examined, what we found with the launch Joy-Con issues was primarily in the left controller. It was essentially a weak and somewhat poorly placed antenna, so there was little issue in handheld and not much trouble when close to the Switch, but as soon as the Joy-Con was by your side or behind your back or too far away, there was a disturbance in the force. Next, with the Joy-Con drift, which is the most pertinent issue, it was found that the primary trouble is the material at the base of the inside of the joystick, for many, was worn down, meaning there's some debris in there, but also it's not an exact surface, so it allows for the stick to orient differently than usual, and in some other cases it appears it may not even be that, but rather just random debris inside the stick. On this real quick, I have seen some people say that the Joy-Con drift isn't a real issue, and it's just people taking bad care of their belongings. That's not really the case, but we'll get to that kind of right towards the end. And finally, the Switch Lite drift issues happened, and based on the number of reports and whatnot, those should really be chalked up to manufacturer defects. This would be different than the regular drift because that's as a result of wear and tear, whereas these cases came out of the factory this way. So although the symptom is the same, the root cause itself is different. That's not to say, however, that the sticks in the current Switch Lites won't eventually suffer the same fate as the ones in the Joy-Con, because they probably will. It's the same sticks. And finally, with all this background, we can tackle the actual question at hand, which is, what did Nintendo do to fix this, and why haven't they already? And luckily, we have an example of how they did handle something like this before. The left Joy-Con issue. As mentioned before, the problem was just Bluetooth connection, but it was completely widespread. The launch Joy-Cons all had this short and poorly placed antenna, and once the reports were out, Nintendo knew about it. So what did they do? They told everyone to contact support, troubleshoot it, and if it didn't get fixed with regular software patches, they'd have to have them send in to Nintendo, and if they were within the 1-year warranty, it would be fixed for free. As I mentioned back in that other video, I actually had to go through this process myself, and the whole thing took about a week or so. The fix was just to add a piece of conductive foam and send it back. But then, some months later, to be honest, I tried to find the date for this by searching through articles and stuff, but I couldn't find it. I want to say it was like 3 months later, so like June 2017, something around there. So 3 months or so later, the new stock of Joy-Con went out with the conductive foam. Then to my memory, this was the state of Joy-Con for a long time, until Switch version 2 came out, and guess what? Finally, Nintendo added an antenna in their left Joy-Con, which fixed the connection issue drastically in August of 2019. So that 3-month figure was the turnaround for a workaround, but not for an actual fix. That took 2.5 years. You see, research and development takes a long time, and then even more time for approval from the FDA and all that stuff. Meaning we're now getting a peek at what we're looking at here. So in July 2019, when the reports all got loud at once, Nintendo already had the Switch Lites and their stock for holiday in production. There was no way they could stop the presses to get R&D done real fast, get it approved, and then get it out.
Woohoo! Stop the presses! Start the presses!
And as you've probably been screaming at your screen for a while now because you know and you've been waiting for me to say it, Nintendo also had a class action lawsuit filed against them for the Joy-Con drift around July of 2019, which complicates everything quite a bit. What this means is Nintendo can't publicly agree that they have faulty joysticks in their Joy-Con and their hardware because there's an active lawsuit going on. And I looked this up a lot, and every piece of legal advice says don't admit fault when somebody's suing you or anything. That's why it says it on your car insurance. Right at the back it says don't admit fault, dummy. But Nintendo of America, because they were the ones being sued, at least did do something good in the meantime. Since this is a court case in the United States, Nintendo of America now has a policy to fix Joy-Cons with drift for free, regardless of warranty or anything. This is a great help and should be taken advantage of, but the reason it's not the case in several other countries is simply because Nintendo of America is acting in good faith as a result of the lawsuit, whereas other countries aren't in that same situation and don't feel pressure to react similarly, meaning you'd have to pay for the fix yourself. So where does this bring us exactly? Well, before I give my conclusion thoughts, I do want to touch on something that I mentioned earlier. Is this just an issue of people not adequately taking care of their property? No, it's not. We don't know why exactly it's happening to some and not others, but if it's a case of the pads being worn down from use, that actually is a problem. that means they're not fulfilling their actual roles that they're intended to do. People are using their joysticks exactly how they're meant to, but just maybe more frequently or aggressively or something like that, but that's what you're supposed to do with them. But if a seatbelt in a car becomes faulty because somebody's using it too aggressively or too much, that's a problem. The seatbelt's got a malfunction. That's not an issue of misuse. So the joysticks are kind of the same thing. They should be designed to withstand use no matter how extreme. However, I am glad for those of you who don't have this issue at all. I've got 4 sets of Joy-Con and one of them has it, so I'm really glad to have 3 that just don't have it at all. But for those of you that don't have the issue, try to be understanding of those that do. So to sum up, why hasn't Nintendo fixed the Joy-Con drift yet? There's a couple bits to this answer. First of all, they weren't really pushed to start having to fix it until the media outrage and lawsuit that happened back in July. And that means that even if they wanted to, they can't admit any guilt with a lawsuit pending. But lastly, based on their good faith with fixing the Joy-Cons that are already defective, I think there's an enormous chance that they already are working on this just silently in the background, and they'll fix it, just not really tell anybody because obviously the lawsuit case. But the problem is there's no foam patch fix for a joystick like there was for the antenna. So the only way for them to actually fix it is to R&D the whole thing, have it go through the FDA and any of that kind of stuff, which will unfortunately take a while. So we're not letting Nintendo off the hook for this. It actually is an issue that needs to be addressed and fixed. But unfortunately, because of all these complications, it's possible that they might not be able to talk about it while they do fix it. So that said, it might not be a full 2 years, but it could be a little while before we see this completely gone for good. But that's what I think. What do you think? Do you think Nintendo could be silently working on this in the background? Would it make you feel better to find out that that was the case, that they're working on it and just can't say anything about it? Or do you think they're ignoring it completely? Let me know all that and more down in the comments down below. We'll take a couple of those and talk about them on our podcast this weekend directly to you. There's a link in the description and under my face here in the little circle thing. And then also like the video and comment while you're down there, and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, you'll see more stuff like that from us. All right, that's about it for now. Have a great rest of your day. See you next week.